Senator, thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely.
There have been some disturbing revelations in the past few days about the extent to which the government possesses surveillance data, personal data about Americans' cell phone use, internet use. You've expressed some concerns about that in some recent interviews. What do you think needs to be done at this point?
Well, can I back up just a bit before we get to what needs to be done? I think there are some things that need to be done, but I think it's important to put this whole discussion in context. This is a debate that's been going on for about 10,000 years. The trick is to create a government that's powerful enough to protect us, but isn't so powerful that it abuses us. And this has been the challenge of political science and government forever. And it was certainly the principal challenge that the people that wrote our Constitution were aware of. Madison said, if people were angels, we wouldn't need government. And if angels were running government, we wouldn't need checks and balances. Neither one of those is the case. And we have to create a government that can exercise the necessary powers without becoming too powerful and abusing us. And that's exactly what this discussion is all about. It's all about security versus privacy. There are a couple of things that concern me. One is that, take the Boston bombing. Well, as soon as that occurred and they found out who the bombers were, the first thing everybody wanted to know is it a plot? Are there other people they're talking to? And one way to find that out is to see who the fellow had called on his phone. Under the current law, and what we've learned in the last few days is all of those phone data of everybody is kept by the government, by the National Security Administration. In other places, this same problem is dealt with by the data staying with the phone company, and if you have a need for a particular probe, question, you get what amounts to a warrant, and then you search, but the government doesn't have all of that data. That makes me feel a little more comfortable. Right now, I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever that it's been abused, that there was any intent to abuse it. But I just, I guess I'm like Reagan, trust but verify. Mm-hmm. And I would be more comfortable if there were structural protections rather than simply relying on the goodwill of the people who happen to be in charge of the operation right now.
This program, or these programs, were established and evolved before you were a member of the Senate.
Right.
But you are a member of the Senate's Intelligence Committee now, right, and have been for 5 or 6 months. Right. How much do you know about this program?
Well, I knew generally about, I knew about the Patriot Act and the activities of the intelligence community. I've been going to 2-a-week briefings for 5 months now. We haven't had briefings on this particular power. I think it would be disingenuous if I said I know nothing about it. I certainly knew the broad outlines, not necessarily the specifics or how often the data was collected and those kinds of things. But I think, as we learn more about it, we ought to have the debate, and it's a debate the public should be involved in. I mean, I think one of the problems, I think the Senate, my understanding is that most senators knew about this when the Patriot Act was reauthorized and these things were discussed, and I wasn't there, but my understanding is most people did know about it. I'm not sure the general public knew it. I'm sure they didn't. So we really need a public debate so people can understand the balance that they're being asked to strike between privacy and security. Example is we've accepted, reluctantly, but we've accepted taking our shoes off when we get on an airplane. That's an invasion of privacy. But we do it because we think that's worth doing in order to not have a bomb on the airplane. What if they said, okay, you've got to take all your clothes off? I think we'd say, maybe that's going too far. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? It's a question of where the legitimate requirements of security stop and invasion of privacy start. And there's not any clear, bright line. We got to always keep debating and figuring that out.
Are there things you know about this that you can't tell us?
Yes. But I don't think there's anything that is terribly, substantively, shockingly different than what has been discussed in the press. And this is I have an oath of office, and it involves confidentiality. So I've got to honor that. But as I say, I don't think that limitation affects the essence of the debate. And I think it's one that we have to, it's one that we just have to keep, this is a debate that we have to keep having. And part of the problem is the technology keeps changing. I mean, you know, the Constitution says the people shall be secure in their persons and papers. Nothing about wiretapping. But 100 years ago, wiretapping was a big issue, and there had to be law developed about what is wiretapping a violation of the Fourth Amendment. The answer was yes. So do you have to get a warrant? Yes. What do you have to show? Probable cause. So now we're in a whole new age where it's not wiretapping necessarily, but it may be internet tapping. What are the requirements? What is a reasonable search and seizure? That's what the Fourth Amendment says. It doesn't prohibit all search and seizures. It says no unreasonable searches and seizures. And traditionally, that's been interpreted that you have to go to a court, show them some kind of probable cause that a crime is going to be committed, and then you get a warrant, and then you go and do the wiretapping, or you search the house. It's not exactly the same situation, but that's the way I feel. That's the principle we should start from.
How can you safeguard Americans' constitutional rights when you're sworn to secrecy about the very activities that might be violating them?
Because I don't think the confidentiality requirements of the committee go to constitutional rights. It's really what's confidential are the details and specifics of the program, not to are we getting business records from phone companies, and are we trying to examine the communications of suspected terrorists. So I think, you know, there is a bit of a balance there, but if I'm on the committee and I learn of a program that we're running that is inimical to, I think, the privacy rights of Americans, then it's my responsibility to bring that forward in some forum and fight it, which I intend to do. But on the other hand, I don't think it makes sense for me to be able to walk out and say, "Oh, by the way, Mr. Terrorist, here's what we're doing to try to catch you." I mean, again, it's about balance, and throughout our history, we've been wrestling with this. You know, Abraham Lincoln set aside habeas corpus during the Civil War. He made a judgment that particular constitutional right was less important than preserving the Constitution itself. And these kinds of decisions are never easy. Try to imagine, if you will, that if the headline this morning, instead of Obama overreaches by gathering too much data, the headline had been, Obama abolished program that would have prevented nuclear explosion in Miami. Then all of the thunder would be about why. Why didn't he protect us? Why, you know, the articles of impeachment would have been drawn up by now. And, you know, a president, the primary responsibility of government is security. It's right in the preamble of the Constitution, to provide for the common defense. And that means from internal threats, you know, thieves and murderers and rapists, and it also means external threats, terrorists or countries that want to do us in. And that's always going to involve some level of confidentiality, and it also always involves difficult decisions. Churchill in World War II knew about radar. He didn't want the Germans to know that we knew. And so he had to make some really agonizing decisions in order to keep that secret, because it furthered the ability of the British Isles to survive as an independent nation.
How would you characterize the climate around terrorism, surveillance, and intelligence in this country right now? You've been critical of this administration for its policy on the use of drones against American citizens overseas. Now we have these disclosures about NSA surveillance. Do you have any concerns about where we are as a nation right now in terms of what we need to know and who needs to know it?
I think there is a need to reassess and to be sure, not necessarily that we aren't collecting the intelligence that we need, but that we're doing it in a way that minimizes intrusions on privacy. Again, you create an institution whose job it is to collect intelligence. What are they going to do? They're going to collect intelligence. There have to be outside checks. And I have to tell you that when I first joined the Intelligence Committee, I'd been there maybe a month. I'd been to 3 or 4 meetings. And it suddenly occurred to me that this was an unusual and pretty awesome, and I mean that in the literal sense of the word, responsibility, because nobody else is watching these guys. The 2 intelligence committees in the House and the Senate are really the only check on this institution. Whereas, you know, if it's the EPA, you got reporters watching it and interest groups, and you know, there's a lot of visibility. These organizations, by their nature, are not visible, and therefore those of us who've been assigned the responsibility of watching them better damn sure watch them. And I've taken that very seriously, and I've been out and visited some of these agencies. I'm doing it more. I've looked into the drone program. I've done a lot of reading. I've done a lot of work on this, and it's a and you know, this question that we're talking about today is always on the pretty near the surface, the relation between adequate security and invasion of privacy. And you know, we all, in an ideal world, we'd say, okay, we want total national security and total privacy. It's pretty hard to make that happen. Everybody wanted to know who that guy, Tamerlan, was calling. The only way you can know that is if you can get at the phone records. If we pick up, now it's important to distinguish, there are really 2 issues hit us at once. One is the phone record piece, which is I think it's very important to make clear that it's not content of phone calls. Because when I first read the very first story, it wasn't clear. And I think a lot of people said, they're listening into my calls. They're not. It's a question of which number called which other number and how long. And it was just raw data. It could only be probed by a second process of saying, okay, here we've identified Tamerlan's phone number. We want all the calls he's made in the last 3 months, and they go in to the database. The other one about the internet is focused exclusively on foreigners and foreign use of the internet. Now, that's easy to say. The secondary effect is it picks up incidentally internet use by other people who are using that network, or who the foreigner is connected to. But you know, if you can pick up email traffic between Osama bin Laden and one of his lieutenants that says, okay boys, June 17th is the day when we're going to hit Los Angeles, and we can foil that plot, that's important. And I don't think there are too many people who would say, oh, you know, the hell with Los Angeles. The question is, how do we get that information while being minimally intrusive on our own people? This is, you know, this is, as I say, it's not a new problem, and it's not an easy problem. And people like me have the responsibility to keep probing and asking questions and saying, are there ways we can do this without the government holding all of this data? And are there alternative ways that we can do it to minimize intrusion on the public? And the important thing is, it shouldn't depend on who's in charge. It ought to depend, there ought to be rules and procedures that affect whoever's in charge and limit their ability to abuse us.
This is we could call this a bipartisan initiative. It's a program that began during a Republican administration. It's continued now in Democratic administration. To date, Democrats have been arguably more vociferous in their criticism of this, and Republicans somewhat more muted. You're an independent. Do you have any concerns about the role that partisan politics might play in this debate as it goes forward?
I don't think it will. I don't think it'll be partisan politics. I think there'll be ideological differences. I think there are members of the Senate, for example, who are more aggressive, who are more interventionist, want to go after those terrorists more aggressively. There are other members of the Senate who are ideologically more concerned about privacy rights and First Amendment rights. But I don't think it's necessarily partisan. I think, for example, one of the greatest critics of this program is Ron Wyden, who's a Democrat, and yet he's on the Intelligence Committee. I don't think it'll be partisan. I think it's going to be values-based, if you will. And it really comes down to how do you feel about what risks to privacy are necessary and reasonable to get what increment of protection from security, in security. And I mean, it may have a partisan cast, but I don't think too much. Yesterday I was in the Intelligence Committee meeting, and Republicans were asking just as probing questions as Democrats. I didn't really see it. I didn't see it. I see a lot of issues break down that way. I didn't see this one.
Thank you for being with us today.
Glad to. Yeah, tough issue. Thanks for the questions.
Sure.